Hello there. Global instability is closer than we think, but it won't be driven by climate change. It will come from a worldwide demographic implosion. And a perfect storm seems to have been created to ensure that happens. But are we now being led by the nose into a rather cold-blooded solution to the ensuing tsunami? More on that in a minute. Now, everything we take for granted today, in the developed world anyway, will be pulled out from under us unless we deal with this demographic time bomb. And that time bomb is a dramatic fall in total fertility rates across the world, coupled with higher mortality ages, people staying alive for decades longer than before, sometimes with very complex medical needs. Too few young people and too many elderly and ill people. It's something that Elon Musk and Jordan Peterson have talked about. And I gather that when this starts, the ratings agencies downgrade the countries concerned and their debt gets more expensive to service. Now, once a nation's fertility rate gets below a replacement value of 2.11, their population declines unless they keep people alive for longer and import more people. But when you do that, it only camouflages the upcoming disaster. And that's exactly what developed countries have been doing for years. Instead of creating a national family-first atmosphere, successive governments have wanted your noses kept to the grindstone to keep GDP and taxes afloat. Then they've imported more people to make up for the lack of youngsters. And in 2020, nearly 2/3 of the global population lived in countries where fertility is below that replacement fertility rate. Their underlying population numbers are in decline. And don't believe the lie that the world population numbers are spiralling up out of control. They're not. The annual population growth is slowing and will hit the point of no growth within maybe 3 or so decades. And then the UN projects it will decrease. And when that starts, it's very hard, if not impossible, to reverse it. The main problem is that with a decreasing number of young people, you have fewer workers every year coming through the system. But the elderly hang around ever longer. A top-heavy demographic triangle with too few workers to sustain it. You can say goodbye to that pension system for a start, and there will be too few carers for everyone that needs one, and more mouths to feed than there are fit hands to make that food. Now, one way to help address this is to boost productivity by mechanisation. But at the moment, the big corporate and government answer is, blow that, keep the newcomers coming in instead, because it's the cheapest option. But once that demographic slide takes hold, the dwindling number of workers can then start charging a fortune for their services. The price of food will inexorably rise. How will the cash-strapped elderly manage to pay for that? Now, many people would say a reduced world population is a great thing. But it's not so great if most of them are elderly and gasping and wheezing their way alone through their twilight years. And humans are generally social animals. That's why we live in clumped groups in villages and towns. It's also an efficient way of getting at the food and services we need. That means that some communities will collapse as their numbers dwindle and they can no longer function as a group, and a point will be reached where they look to resettle into another community. But will they be welcome there? Especially if they bring nothing to the table, are relatively elderly, and viewed suspiciously as a potential drain on the rest. And will there still be a fully functioning water and power system across the developed world? Or will it end up fracturing as the number of workers available to keep it running declines? And why pay for a massive system you no longer need anyway? And then there's the political power question, the control freak question. Will those that love to control our lives, or who have visions of controlling the world and everyone on it, ever allow a situation to develop where there are too many disparate and separate groups of people setting up their own community systems around the world? One of them might end up becoming very large and forming a powerful rival to the New World Order. That will be a threat to those that wish to control us and will not be tolerated. I mean, they might even set up their own currency and tax systems. No. There must be updated records of who these people are, where they are, and what they're doing. But how do you do that within a fractured world where everything has collapsed? Unless you manage that collapse in such a way that it minimises the impact on your control. First, while the fertility rate drops, either naturally or due to some other reason, you also somehow ensure that the more senior in age amongst the population do not become a drag, if you get my drift. And also that those in the middle, age-wise, are all healthy workers. Now, how could all that be engineered? Anyway, if you can somehow manage that, then you will very quickly achieve a smaller, balanced population. But you will then need them clumped together in order to control them. So they would somehow need to be forced into small, local areas with no access to their own transport, while making it as easy as possible for people from the underdeveloped world to get here so they can become part of the project. And then restrict the energy supply to make sure no one can just go and set up somewhere else. That small community must be their only lifeline. But that small community will actually be a subset of a megacity full of millions of people, and probably the only place you can access sophisticated healthcare, with all movement strictly controlled for climate purposes, of course. And these cities are developing. And in everything you do, it must be planet-friendly, despite the population numbers having been drastically reduced to a level where everyone could just be free to roam around at will with no impact on the Earth at all. But as I said, that will not be tolerated. And eating factory-produced frankenfoods will become the norm, all touted as being safer than eating the real thing. All sounds a bit far-fetched and dystopian, but if you are a control freak, then you will need to maintain control throughout any massive change, won't you? So that you come out the other end still in charge. And don't think that this demographic stuff will come as a surprise or breaking news to the WEF, the UN or your government. They all know about it. But they haven't been pushing for a higher birth rate in the developed world to ensure proper continuity to avoid problems, have they? In fact, just the opposite. They've made having children into a massive burden to make it as unattractive a proposition as they can. They know what's coming, and now they have to manage that imminent population decline in a way that keeps them in control. Richard.
So we now have a fertility crisis. Ah well. When in crisis, let's do what we did quite recently and hand everything over to the state. Quickly, do it, so they can sort it out with their experts. Doesn't matter if it's a Tory government or a Labour government, let's hand over all our responsibilities to those in authority that know best, and will take care of us. We all love to be ruled over by other people, like socialists or even by capitalists who rule over us. Because all of us are socialist and capitalist at the same time. And yes, I just said that because everyone is socialist and everyone is capitalist. It just depends where you sit on the food chain on any given day. If you have lost your job, say a job that you've had for many years, or your business is shut down, a business that you built up for many years, possibly as a result of lockdown, and now you find you have no career prospects and live in an impoverished area with your own horrible, impoverished life, you will very rapidly become weary of your previous capitalist condition and find yourself now identifying as a socialist. And yes, you will. And anyone who says they wouldn't is a liar. Because if you have no food in your belly, your children are going hungry, your free market principles go out the window. But on the other side of the equation, if you're a hard left-wing person who has a reasonable and reliable standard of living, who one day inherits a load of money from a relative, say, only to find out then that the state wants a huge chunk of it, well, they will also then find themselves on the opposite side, because they will be looking for the most capitalist, free market serving political representation that is out there. Oh, yes. And who can blame either of the people in those two different scenarios? Self-interest may not be an endearing feature of human nature, but it's kept us alive as a species. It's about time we owned up to this aspect of our so-called human nature. And it's because of human nature, the large state societal structure will always work for the few, but not the many. What works for the many is being able to look after ourselves without being told what we can and cannot do. But unfortunately, we don't live in a world where we can truly fend for ourselves. You see, as I have said before, it's all about having access to the land. Land which provides all we need, and it's always been about access to the land, all of our issues through history, because with no access to the land, we are always going to be reliant on somebody else, namely those that own the land. And with this in mind, you can see where the whole left-wing, right-wing ideology sprang from, because when you just live on the land and have a relationship with the land, socialism and capitalism become irrelevant. I mean, go back to the Romans, or before the Romans invaded Britain, and you had people living off the land in tribal communities. Granted, they weren't always peaceful, but people aren't always peaceful, let's face it. But there was no concept of capitalism or socialism or socialistic communitarianism. There was just those you traded with, the community, the land that you lived off, and the pesky tribe next door trying to steal your goat. But here we are in the 21st century, and access to the land is denied to the masses and has been handed over to a select few people. Yeah, I can't think who that would be. Any idea? People, and very rich people and corporations with industrial scale agricultural farming taking the place of much higher yielding permaculture farming, where you have blooming bees, biodiversity. Oh, blooming bees. Well, blooming with bees and biodiversity, I should say, and honey and all the things that we need. And you won't end up with those your windscreen filled with those pesky bugs that you have to wipe off. Oh, haven't you noticed? All the bugs have gone. When did you last have to clean your headlights from the bugs you accumulated over a week's driving? Okay, a month's driving. Okay, a year's driving. I remember when I used to have to regularly clean the bugs from my headlights. If I didn't, they were far dimmer. Genuinely, where have all the bugs gone? That should tell you something about what's happening to our environment. I have no interest in climate change, net zero, and all that nonsense, but you have to be a special kind of stupid to think it's okay to pollute the fragile ecosystems that sustain us. That's just logical. We all have an inbuilt appreciation, out of necessity probably, for the countryside and creation. I mean, nobody goes on holidays to the countryside to stare at a factory, do they? No. We all know something is wrong, and you don't have to be a liberal, lefty, green soy latte guzzling yogurt weaver to see that something is terribly wrong. Take man out of his natural environment with his hunter-gatherer instincts, and an incredible relationship to the land, built up since man first walked the earth. And then you take that man and you place him in the modern world, and you will find a creature adapting his hunter-gatherer instincts to cater for his new environment. And this will be what he puts out. He will say, rule number 1 will always be do what is easiest and pick the low-lying fruit, and choose the tribe or political party that offers the lowest lying fruit. Remember, rule number 2, that will be stick a spear into anyone who threatens regular access to low-lying fruit. In other words, humans are hardwired for self-preservation, and a desire for comfort are open to corruption. Our desire for comfort leads to us being open for corruption, I should say. So giving individuals more centralized power is not a good idea. Democracy should always be one pitchfork away in distance. Anyway, what do you lot think about what has been said in today's video? And leave your creamy pills of wisdom in the comment section below. And we will see you again tomorrow at 5:45, 5:45, 5:45.